Hello dear tea friends from around the world, and welcome to a new tea class with me, Stefan Erler, from the Tea Masters blog in Taiwan, and also from the tea-masters.com boutique, and you're welcome to go there and find some of the fine teas and the teaware that I've selected. Today we are going to talk more about teaware actually than about tea. But I'm going still to drink while teaching because it's one of the side kicks that I love about this job, and that I can drink tea and work at the same time. Today's subject is going to be porcelain, and the subject of the class we will examine this book. You can see The White Road, A Journey into an Obsession by Edmund de Waal. Edmund de Waal is a ceramist in England, and he's I think in the 50s now. He has so he's more like an artist ceramist, making things by hand and exhibiting in museums, being collected by rich people. Well, now at least, maybe not so much in his beginnings, but that's another subject. So he was always very much interested in porcelain, and this book, The White Road, is a bit the book that he had to write now in his 50s. After a life dedicated to porcelain, to better understand what he's been doing. So he wanted to go back to the origins of porcelain. So he traveled to at least 3 places: Jingdezhen in China, Dresden in Germany, and then also went back to the beginnings of porcelain in England. So that's why I will divide this class into 3 parts, because there's so much to talk about all these 3 cities. So today we are going to talk only about Jingdezhen, and in the next 2 classes we'll talk also about the history of porcelain in Europe, first with Dresden and some other towns that experimented with porcelain in continental Europe. And then the last part is about England. And actually he is also, his conclusion is also a bit, it goes back actually in a circle to look at in each of these 3 places, not only the good thing about porcelain, but maybe also the bad part, and we'll talk about that also in a later class. So today we are going to talk about Jingdezhen. Let me quote a few of his words. In the very beginning, he starts, "I'm in China. I'm trying to cross a road in Jingdezhen in Jiangxi province, the city of porcelain, the fabled Ur where it all starts. Kiln chimneys burning all night, the city like one furnace with many vent holes of flames, factories for the imperial household, the place in the fold of the mountains where my compass points." So we already see that Jingdezhen is a very bustling city, very difficult to cross a street. And he later writes, "It's the city of secrets, a millennium of skills, 50 generations of digging and cleaning and mixing white earth, making and knowing porcelain, full of workshops, potters, glazers and decorators, merchants, hustlers and spies." I think this really plants very well all the interest that there is about this city, really very unique city, the capital of porcelain in the world. He writes it's 1,000 year of history, and to guide us through this history, we will rely on his book, and he also relies on several things. One of the documents that he's using is a very old document, which is now almost 300 years old. It was written by Père François-Xavier d'Entrecolle, Père, Father d'Entrecolle. So he's a Jesuit missionary, a priest who was sent to China. His main mission was to convert, of course, the Chinese to the Christian faith, but also to better understand this big country, and also a little bit almost to spy on it. The Jesuits, very well educated people, they were sending back information to Rome, and in two letters that he wrote in 1712 and 1722, he wrote about how porcelain was made. And Edmund de Waal, so he's still using these letters from Père d'Entrecolle, because they were very well detailed about how porcelain was made at a time when there was no porcelain in Europe. He also says, "Oh, I'm in China because porcelain is China. Porcelain is a journey to China." What makes for him porcelain so interesting? He writes, this is also, I think, quite interesting. Porcelain is really very plastic. Pinch a walnut-sized piece between a thumb and four fingers until it is as thin as paper, until the whorls of your fingers emerge. Keep pinching it. It feels endless. You feel it will get thinner and thinner until it is as thin as a gold leaf and lifts into the air. And it feels clean. Your hands feel cleaner after you have used it. It feels white, by which I mean it is full of anticipation, of possibility. It is a material that records every movement of thinking, every change of thought. So another great quote, I think, from this book. What really fascinates the author, this porcelain maker, about porcelain. And later he writes that porcelain has been made for 1,000 years and traded for 1,000 years. It has been in Europe for 800 years. Now this is where I have a little bit of added value to this review, because porcelain has not been made for 1,000 years. This is where he's wrong. It has been made for, you can say, 1,000 years in Jingdezhen. This is accurate. But actually, porcelain was invented in the Eastern Han Dynasty. That's between 2,000 and 1,800 years ago. So in the Zhejiang province, at first it was more Celadon type of porcelain, but never mind. Porcelain, real porcelain in China has been invented not 1,000 years ago, but 1,800 years at least ago. Jingdezhen, though, the city actually was renamed according to the Song Dynasty, to a Song Dynasty emperor. His name was Song Zhenzong, and emperors, they would give different names to their reign. Maybe the first years had one name, and after a couple of years, or 3-4 years, they would change another name to say, oh, now we enter into this kind of era, etc., etc. So Song Zhenzong, he gave his name. He gave the name of Jingde to his era between 1004 and 1007, and it's because of this era name, Jingde, that this city was renamed then Jingdezhen. Zen means city. At that time, in so exactly 1007 and now 16 years ago. So he's accurate that porcelain was made in Jingdezhen for 1,000 years, but it started before that in China. Now, the name porcelain, he also leans into it. Where does it come from? Actually, the name porcelain that we use in Europe comes from the Italian porcellani, because when porcelain first arrived, the first merchants who purchased porcelain from China were the Venetians. I don't know exactly about the pronunciation, sorry about that. And when porcelain arrived in Venice, this is correct, they looked at it and said, oh, this is so white, so cute. It looks, for them, it reminded them of cowrie shells. These shells that were used also as money long time ago, and because they had this similar gloss, also a similar translucence. A lot of cowrie shells are very white, and so they thought they were made of these cowrie shells, and these shells are a bit round and reminded them of little piglets. So they gave the name porcellani, piglets, pigs. So to this special material, tsuchi in Chinese, nothing to do with porks, porcellani, but this name sticked in Europe, and so we are talking about porcelain, porcelain, in Europe now, thanks to these Italians. Now, one of the first places that Edmund de Waal visits when he goes to China and Jingdezhen is a hill of shards. Now he takes us to this hill, and there you have the shards of 1,000 years of broken pots or cups or plates. All these porcelain items that were not well made and that were then discarded, broken, because they did not reach the standard of the maker. So in around Jingdezhen, where the ancient kilns are, you can go and look, and you will find really mountains of shards. And he was on his journey. He would take a piece of shard and say, "Oh, from this he can," a bit like a Sherlock Holmes. Look at this piece. See this broken piece of porcelain, and wonder why it was broken. Because maybe the firing was not well made. Too strong or too weak, so the texture was not well like it should be, or maybe the painting did not succeed. Well, all kinds of reasons might have conducted to the maker discarding this porcelain. So this is it also shows that there was really a standard that had to be reached. It was not so easy to make porcelain. A lot of porcelain did not make it, especially in these old times when even with a saga, which is a stoneware inside which you would place the porcelain to protect it from the fire, but because the firing was done with wood, it was really not very stable, and so there were a lot of failure in these ancient kilns, and therefore a lot of shards can still be found very easily around Jingdezhen, where porcelain was made for 1,000 years. So this brings us to what is actually so special about porcelain. So we have actually three types of items that can be fired. It starts with earthenware. That's why I took this jar. Earthenware is mud turned into a shape, and then in this case a vase. It's really you start with you find a kind of a very hard mud in your soil, and so therefore the mud in most cases will be very dark in color, and here it was wood fired. That's why the color varies a bit with the firing. This one was made by David Louvre, by the way, and it's not glazed. Then, and these wares are fired a bit below 1000 degrees Celsius. Then, harder, we have stoneware. Stoneware, maybe like this Jianyang cup. Stoneware is harder because instead of using the soil, mud, you use stone, and you grind the stone, and then you mix it with water, so that it becomes plastic enough that it can be turned or shaped. And these stoneware, they need much higher firing. They are usually fired about 1200 degrees Celsius. But the color of the clay will also be either gray, dark, black, or brown. It's not white, at least. Then the ultimate in this kind of in ceramics is porcelain. And porcelain, the object of Edmund de Waal's obsession, and also a very useful accessory for tea, because we use it here to make tea, to brew it, to drink from it, to store it. We even have it as a bowl to throw away the wastewater. So on a plate also to put the leaves on. So porcelain can be used for almost all the tea accessories, and it's really very useful. It's almost impossible to make tea without using porcelain nowadays. Porcelain. What is actually porcelain? Porcelain consists of two materials. One is pertunze, and the other one is kaolin. Pertunze contains mica and is the finer part that enters into the composition of the glaze. This one is more easy to find. The real secret to porcelain is kaolin, and kaolin, the name kaolin, comes from a mountain, a hill near Jingdezhen, Kaolin, and this mountain is full of this white clay. And so kaolin clay is a bit like the bone, de Waal explains, while pertunze is more like the flesh. He explains that some people wanted to make porcelain with only pertunze, but it would not stand. Impossible to make a piece of it because it's only flesh and no bone, so it would fall flat. So you need kaolin as for the structure, and then the pertunze will be on the outside to make the gloss and to make it more translucent, and also in the glaze that so that the water will not go seep through. Okay, speaking of water, I'm starting to feel a little bit thirsty, so I'm going to make some tea. We are still waiting for the spring high mountain oolongs. I hope that maybe by next week they'll start to come, or that I will go to get them if they don't come. And in the meantime, I'm still drinking some high mountain oolong from Alishan, from Jiangsu, from this winter. So you see also Jingdezhen clay used as jar, and high mountain oolong, and these little more fancy ancient cups with lots of enamels, lots of colors. Also the Gai one has lots of colors. Okay, I see no questions so far. Please let me know if you hear me well. Are there any? Don't be shy if there is something that I'm not explaining well. Let me know. I'm here for you. Okay. But I'm starting to be a little bit thirsty. So let's demonstrate how we can use porcelain. And then porcelain will also be fired at 1200 degrees plus Celsius. He also explains that this kaolin stone that we find in originally on this kaolin mountain, it will be very white, but it will have a hint of green. And the white one is a stone that is a little bit greenish, and then it has to be grounded, filtered, and so purified, and they do it thanks to the river, and to which brings not only water but also the strength of the river that makes the wheels turn, and it helps to mix the clay, the white clay, and the way it is done traditionally in Jingdezhen, in some of the traditional shops, is still very much the same way as it was done, the way Père d'Entrecol was explaining it 300 years ago. So Jingdezhen really is the center, the capital of porcelain, and it has really become a very large city. It was always a very large city, and it still is, because there's so much work to do with porcelain in this city. You can prepare the clay, you can decorate, you can also shape the clay, you can glaze it and also fire it. at the time of Père d'Entrecol, he was he thought that he counted that approximately 70 people enter into the composition of one bowl or one vase or one jar. 70 different people would work on it. So it was really a work that was highly specialized, with workers really doing one thing in particular where they became good at, really a division of labor that the Ford would think of only maybe in the beginning of the 20th century, but actually this division of labor for making porcelain was already there very, very early in Jingdezhen. Okay. And the very thin cups, they add to the lightness, to the finesse of the tea. Let me continue with my notes on the other side. Also, another thing Edmund de Waal realizes when he goes to Jingdezhen is that while he would order his porcelain from Limoges in France, and then well, you order and you receive it by the kilo. In Jingdezhen, there are a lot of different quality levels and about porcelain. It's really a very complex matter to be able to grade correctly how good the quality is of porcelain, and that people really are really very keen on evaluating the quality of porcelain, and then you will also have different prices for different levels of porcelain. This is something that also we lose a bit track nowadays when porcelain has become much more an industrial thing, that actually in the past the quality of the porcelain was really a key element of how good a piece would become later on. So in this big city now, in Jingdezhen, in modern China, he, of course, as an artist ceramist, he feels this city is a bit strange. It's not making the kind of pots that he's making in his own workshop. It's turning out mass productions of porcelain, and for his taste, for his standards, most of it is pretty ugly and really completely different from what he's making of, or his idea of what porcelain should look like. Most of it is profit driven, and people cut corners. It's not so much about beauty, but it's about efficiency and being able to make the most possible number of items with least effort. Also, he realizes there is one thing that is a bit contradictory. Porcelain is not such an easy material to work with. You have kaolin that serves as the bone, and then pertunze as the flesh, but it is really suitable for smaller items. But because of these restrictions of physics, lots of makers, they are drawn to make very large items of porcelain. So you could also imagine all the challenges that there are to make them stand, that they don't fall on themselves, like making very large, big vases or jars. Here the largest I have is still almost just as high as my hand, but it feels already much larger than these two. But you see some people make vases that are as tall as a person. You can then imagine how big the kiln must be to be able to put these vases there, and that's a bit mission impossible. That this is something that you should not do with porcelain. Edmund de Waal then also visits factory number 72, because he's a bit fed up with all these very commercial porcelain in Jingdezhen. He wants to go back more to the original passion for porcelain, and there he finds one potter, who is making porcelain because he wants to, not because he has to, but because he wants to. So finally, even there in Jingdezhen, it's not so easy to find people who are doing porcelain for passion, but most of them it's simply a business. Then he also talks about cobalt. Cobalt is this pigment that gives this blue color, which has become really a trademark of Jingdezhen. And this cobalt originally came from Persia, from the mines of Kashan, so it had to travel a long way. It helped, of course, that Jingdezhen at that time was under the control of the Mongols during the Yuan dynasty, so they were also kind of controlling these sources of cobalt in Persia. Then the cobalt would change. Cobalt is very valuable. At that time, they were really making sure that the workers would not steal any of the cobalt because it was very expensive. They would even try to recycle the droppings of cobalt, so that really nothing would be lost. It's also one of the ways that experts try to see and determine which era particular piece of antique porcelain comes from, by looking at the cobalt and its color. Like this one is an imitation of Ming Dynasty cobalt, so it is new, but it tries to replicate Ming Dynasty, and you will maybe notice it's a little bit more dark in some places than this one, which is more a replica of Qing Dynasty. And even in the Qing Dynasty, experts will try to differentiate between each Kangxi, Qianlong, Xuande era. So cobalt is one of the markers that helps a bit to identify when a certain antique porcelain was made. In Jingdezhen, Edmund de Waal also finds out that there's a lot of counterfeit forgery and sham. It's a place where you find shards from the past, and these shards can be used into new items. So they would incorporate an old shard into a new piece, and then the value would skyrocket because it's using something old in something new. which is already a skill. But then because of the old part, which can be identified as old, the whole piece will be considered as old, and therefore the price can be very, very high. So in a market, he finds some Tang Dynasty bowls. He says they were made last week, but they look like Tang Dynasty bowls, and even the sellers tell him, "Oh, we can make them look even older if you want. Please tell us if you wish us to make them look older." Oh, about Cobalt, there's another interesting quote I wanted to write, because the Cobalt allows to make to draw, and then therefore also to create stories on porcelain. It's not just a simple white cup, but thanks to the Cobalt, which was the very first pigment to be used, you could write and draw, and therefore create more meaning into these porcelains. And one of in the year 1529, the Emperor Jingdezhen gave designs for the decorations, and these designs were dragons in pursuit of pearls. And this is one of the design I have on these ivory white cups. You have two dragons chasing a pearl. So it's not here. This is made with not with cobalt, but not with a drawing, but with the shape, like a bas-relief of two dragons chasing a pearl. Here it mentions that this kind of decoration already existed in 1529. Gold weighing scales, playing boys, sporting dragons, rising and descending, phoenixes flying through flowers, floral scrolls covering the whole ground, birds flying in the sky. Here, for instance, we have birds flying in the sky. The 8 immortals crossing the sea, lions playing with embroidered balls, etc., etc. So lots of waterfalls, phoenixes rising, shan shui, so with the mountains and water. This is something we find here. So and this cobalt is what is interesting. It's an under the glaze. It's therefore it's very resistant to washing, and it's also very. It allows to be something to be drawn on porcelain. Later on, they would add much more animals, so a lot of different colors. But this is more actually a Western influence to add these more colors, and most of these additional colors are on top of the glaze. What is really special about cobalt blue is that it's under the glaze. Let's do a second brewing. Now, Edmund de Waal also mentions another emperor who was really very fond of porcelain, and that is Yongle. This Yongle, I think Ming Dynasty ruler. One day he received some jade bowls that were presented to him as a gift from a Muslim ruler. This is something that, as an emperor, you would often receive gifts from from foreign rulers who want to be nice to you and be on peaceful terms, and really beautiful balls of jade. And Yongle, he looks at them and says, no, the jade looks nice, but I prefer my porcelain. I prefer porcelain, so please. He returned the balls of jade to this Muslim ruler, I guess, who must have felt pretty upset for his precious jade to be returned to him. But Yongle said, no, the jade does not do it for me. I really prefer to drink from porcelain. Yongle did something else that was one of the wonders of the world. He created a 9-story high octagonal porcelain pagoda, and so it had 284 steps, 261 feet high. It was really one of the tall buildings of its time, and he did this to honor his ancestors, and it used a lot of porcelain, a material which did not exist yet in Europe. It was traded there, but did not exist, and so visitors from Europe, they would see such a pagoda with so much porcelain on it, and at night they would use over 100 lanterns inside to enlighten it. It must have looked really magnificent at a time when there was no electricity. Really one of the worlds. Unfortunately, it has been destroyed during history. Edmund de Waal mentions that maybe some rich billionaire in China is interested in remaking it. We'll see. But of course, he says the plans he has heard about consist of using lots of gold, so losing the finesse, losing the refinement of porcelain, which is a pity. Another interesting thing, another interesting trip that Edmund de Waal makes in Jingdezhen. He visits the archives of Jingdezhen, where they record the porcelain that was made for the national palace, for the emperors of China. So here in this archive, they record how many porcelains were made each year for the household of the emperor. And you can see sometimes the emperor will add, say, oh, next year make more of this kind of balls or less. So the emperors were really looking very carefully at the porcelain that was made and directing the production of porcelain in Jingdezhen. And the very last entry in this archive was for the Emperor Puyi, who then abdicated in 1911. And in 1911, the very last entry was that for the emperor, I guess some of the person who were in charge while he was a kid, they wanted to order 100 porcelain plates glazed in red. Then the archive in Jingdezhen says, sorry, we could not make the red glaze anymore. We lost this skill, and therefore we have sent you 100 plates with a red dragon on the plate. But not really saying sorry, but to say, okay, we changed your order, and instead of red plates, you get white plates with a red dragon on it. Now, in the past, this would have led to lots of heads being chopped off, but this was the very last year of the last emperor of China, and therefore there were no consequences for them. Yeah, it was one page being closed. Actually, the very last imperial ware that was made in Jingdezhen actually was made for Mao Zedong. In 1975, Project 7501 was launched. It was to make a teaware set for Mao Zedong. So the tea set of Mao Zedong is still in the museum in Jingdezhen. You can see it and visit it. And it was made specially for him. Of course, white porcelain with a little bit fancy pinkish kind of miroir flowers on the tea set, and we can say this was really the last time that teaware was made for the Emperor of China, even though he was Mao Zedong. We'll talk a little bit more about Mao Zedong maybe in the very last class about porcelain in 2 weeks. Next week we'll talk about Dresden, where porcelain started to be made in Europe, and then in 2 weeks we'll talk about porcelain in England, since Edmund de Waal is an English porcelain maker. I hope that you have enjoyed this lesson and that you have learned a little bit about porcelain. I wish you a nice weekend and good tea. Delicious.